sing America the Beautiful for our communion hymn. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the
Good morning, everyone. Before we get into the word today, I just want to take a minute to thank all of our men and women in the armed forces for serving and allowing us to celebrate America another year. I know we have a lot of people in our congregation and two men that are now in training, and thank you for all of your sacrifices and those in your family. It's so great to be here. I missed last week because I went up to Kansas City and got my wedding dress altered, which is so crazy to think about. As of today, we have 63 days until we say, I do, I know. I'm super excited. Today we're going to be continuing Jake's series of spiritual disciplines. And when I asked him, he asked me if I wanted to preach this week, and I asked him if he wanted me to talk about a spiritual discipline, and he said, well, you could do whatever you wanted, and I was like, well, I want to talk about worship, because why not? I always want to talk about worship. And it's such a topic that is so near and dear to me. I made it my major. I love the music side. I love the ritual things that we've done for years and years. But first, we are going to say Jake's definition of faith, mostly because we met and he asked me the definition, and I couldn't tell him because my memory is so bad. So we're not going a week without saying it, because if he asks you guys, you have to be able to say it. Okay, so faith is action sustained by confidence in the faithfulness of the promises of God. Yeah, so if he asks someone if we said it, we did. There, I did that. Yeah, so today we're talking about worship. And faith and worship have so much to do with each other. They are so interlocked, whether you see it or not. And worship nowadays looks a little different than the Old Testament in some ways, but in other ways, we are joining in a long-held discipline of worship every time we come together with the Lord. But there was a span of my life that worship and I didn't really mix well. That I didn't know how to worship, how I felt about worship. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I finally started to figure out why I was struggling so hard when worship time came together. When I started college, I had a really hard time because in a small town, I really didn't have to make friends. Like, most of my friends I met in kindergarten. In kindergarten, you just say, hey, we're friends. And they're like, okay, let's go play. But as an adult, there's no playgrounds, which is sad. But I got to college and realized, I don't really know how to make friends. And so a lot of people at MCC, especially the first year, they go to church in groups. And so a really common church to go to in Manhattan is what I call the mega church. Even though it's not a mega church, okay? This is a pretty big church, but the auditorium's huge. The balcony, the first time we went to the balcony, and I was like, this is the balcony? What's the bottom look like? Because you couldn't even see, because the balcony was so high, you couldn't even see down. It was crazy. And I learned later that, so they have three contemporary services in one building, and two or three traditional services in another building. And for one of the services, it's 500 people. So every service, they have a new Maxville in every service. And that just didn't sit well with me. I don't know. It just was so weird. And so these people would go, and I just didn't like it. There's huge, it's just huge. There's lights and fog, and it just wasn't good for me. Now, I'm not digging on mega churches. They're cool every once in a while. But for me, I just felt so lost. Felt so small, which I knew that wasn't true. Whether I was whispering to God in my bed at night, because I had a roommate now, I had to whisper my prayers, but whether I was whispering there or singing at the top of my lungs in that mega church, I knew God heard me, but my heart was not in it. Something was not clicking. And so I didn't go to church. Maybe every once in a while, because I knew I should be going to church, and I better go because they're asking me to go. But there was a huge disconnect between the head knowledge that I was learning at a Christian college versus the heart knowledge. And I didn't really know what I was experiencing or really how to articulate how I was feeling until I started dating Charles. And Charles is a church boy. So when we first started dating, he was like, okay, where are we going to go to church? And I said, I'm on a worship team at this church, but I only want to go when I'm on the worship team, and that's it. So about every other week, we'd go to church, and he kind of was just like, okay. But he started to push into me, what is this? Why is this? Why don't you want to go? And I finally came up with the question because I had to explain it to somebody else. And the question was this: how long do I allow myself to not feel like doing something spiritual before just doing the thing, even though I don't want to? Because obviously, growing up, I heard from my parents, sometimes we have to do things we don't like in life. That's just true. We have to do our homework. We have to go to work. You have to eat your vegetables. The basics in life. But to be honest, that's never really sit well with me. I've never been a because I said so type of person. I want to know why. I love learning the traditions and the why we do things and how they came about, just everything about that. And so when Charles gave me that answer of we just go because we go, that didn't sit well with me. And keep in mind, I'm not talking about the spiritual discipline of just coming to church, because I'm not preaching to you about coming to church because obviously you're here in church, so that would be kind of backwards. But I'm talking about everything we do outside of here. You see, I wasn't going to church, but I also wasn't opening my Bible any more than I had to for school. I wasn't spending time with him. I was waking up 5 minutes before my class started because it's a 2-minute walk to class. I wasn't devoting to him. I wasn't surrendering to him. I wasn't doing anything. Then I took a class at MCC, Principles of Christian Worship, with a woman I have come to adore and love and appreciate more than she will ever know. Dr. Janie Lynn McCaffrey made the class read a book that maybe didn't answer my question outright, but it gave me a new perspective, which is probably what I needed more in that moment than just an answer of, 6 months or a week or something. You Are What You Love tackles this subject head first in basically the first 10 pages. I remember getting this book, and we had to write a report and stuff on it, so I didn't want to read it, but I went ahead and did, and it changed everything for me. It introduces key definitions that I got to make sure I get right, so I got to read from here. And you'll see why. Habitually spiritual versus spiritually habitual. Which those are pretty big words, but the first, being habitually spiritual, was me when I Google Calendared church in on Sundays. When I put my classes in, and that's it. That's only when I thought about Jesus during those set times. But spiritually habitual is when I make a habit out of everything that I do, making it spiritual. Is this a growing process that I don't think I will ever perfect? Yeah. I don't think I'll ever get it right or perfect in the end. Is the end goal perfect worship? Yes. But we don't live in a perfect world. One thing that helped me through this writer's block in worship was realizing how much of an impact posture has. And one thing that God was speaking to me over and over during this time of just feeling like nothing was going on was surrender. And I wasn't entirely sure what that meant at the time, but then I remembered a time when I asked Jesse at CIY, why do people raise their hands during worship? And I think he probably laughed because I didn't know. And he described it to me in a way that made complete sense to me and probably will to you. So they had a son before they left here, and he was the cutest little boy ever. I cannot wait to see him in September. And they allowed me to watch him. They trusted me with their son, which was so crazy because I'd never really, I'd babysat before, but they really just were like, yeah, take him outside, whatever. And I'm sure you can remember, the first kid that you watched, or when you had to watch your own kids or grandkids. And when those kids are playing and they get hurt or something and they come and stand in front of you and they look at you and they raise their hands, what are they asking? Without saying a single word, pick me up. I'm here. I need you. And so even in that moment of worship, and my heart was not in it, my arms were raised because I needed the Father. And another thing was that once I got to college, I really noticed that I had racing thoughts. And so with my arms up, I couldn't think about anything else other than, I need to work out. I'm really out of shape. I can only hold it, hopefully this isn't a 10-minute song. But I wasn't thinking about anything else. Except that my arms were up, that I was crying out to the Father. And this all goes for worship in a music setting. I could go on and on and on about posture, but I'm already hungry, so I know you guys are too, so I'm not going to go on. But there's so much we can do with posture. And our view is so limited if we only think of worship as songs, which we know in our head, yes, worship isn't only songs, but what does that mean for us? And honestly, I wasn't even really too sure about this until I was in a relationship with someone that is not as musically inclined as myself. Notice I didn't say musically talented. He probably can sing. He just doesn't around me for some reason. But I just felt kind of lost. How do you worship if you don't sing at church every week? Because my view of worship was so limited. Last summer, I spent the whole summer in Yellowstone, and we had a guy named Ben who came to every service. He would drive the 20 minutes to our other location, do church there, drive with us to in Canyon and do that service with us, and then spend the whole day with us. But something that always sticks out in my head when I think about him is when our time of offering came. When our time of offering came, I usually was like, I don't have any cash, so sorry, but he always had a $20 bill, and he was always so excited to give it. And at first, I thought it was just a show, but week after week after week, he was always so excited to give his offering. And so finally, one day we were hiking or something, and someone asked, why are you so excited? And he just shrugged and said, it's worship, man. And that has stuck with me. When I think about worship, that's what I think about. It's worship. But I want to challenge you today with disciplines that we do outside of these walls. Because if I can be bold, if we don't do anything outside of these walls that involves worshiping Jesus in some way, shape, or form, it doesn't really matter what we do in here. If we are what we love, we are to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, then we are to worship in that same way too. And this didn't really click until I got out of my little Christian bubble. In Manhattan, I worked in MCC's cafeteria. I went to a Christian college with chapel every Thursday and church every Sunday. But now we moved out here since everything's shut down, and we are working at Larned State Hospital. And let me tell you, there's not a lot of worshiping going on there. And at first I wasn't worshiping either because I was just trying to get my bearings, trying to make sure I had everything together. But I read this social media post once that made me think. And it talks about this cup, and you're holding a cup, and say you fill it with coffee. Someone comes up to you, hits the cup, what's going to pour out? Coffee. The same with water. You put in water in your cup, someone comes up to you, water. Think about if you're worshiping all the time. Or maybe think about if you're not worshiping at all, only on Sundays. Maybe on Sundays you're good. Someone hits your cup, worship comes out, prayer, calmness, peace. But what if you're not worshiping? What if you're not filling yourself every day with something of God, and you got a cup that's not full of God, full of something else, anything else? Impatience, You're not very kind. Someone comes up and hits that cup. What's going to pour out? When life happens, and life will happen, what is going to pour out of your cup? As we close today, we're ending super early. You're welcome. I invite you to really let it sink in of what I've talked about today. Do you need a change in posture? Do you need to raise your hands and surrender because your heart just isn't in it? Or maybe your heart is in it, but your mind and your body need to link together. Do you need to make mundane things that you do every day spiritual? I know we have a lot of farmers in here. Every time you cut a crop, which is probably a lot right now, you're thanking God. Or that crop that didn't make it because of storms, are you worshiping in lament, thanking God? I don't know what you're doing, but thanks. You got it. Maybe you need to reach out and ask some questions that you've been afraid of asking because you are afraid of what people will think about you. Or maybe you don't know the words to ask. For so long, for 2 years, I did not realize what was the question that I was asking myself until I actually had to formulate a question. We're not going to have an invitation today, mostly because I can't I can't initiate you into our church. I'm not the head pastor, even though I am in charge today, according to some. But if you need prayer, we can pray for you. I can pray for you. The front pew is open for you during this next few moments. Maybe life's got you down. Things are spiraling out of control, and you need someone to intervene on your behalf. If worship is something that has been a struggle for you, and you want to talk through some things, maybe not here, come find me. I've got multiple books, multiple life experiences, and professors that are so good that I could turn you towards if I don't have an answer. Worship is something that is constantly changing and constantly morphing and as life goes on. Pray with me. Father, you deserve to be worshiped in all we do. These walls cannot contain you. It cannot contain your church. Your church is so much more than this building. We cry out to you as a family reaching towards you, as a child wanting to be pulled close to you in this time of fear. I pray for this church, that boldness would be in love, that teaching would be in love, that worship would be in love. Thank you for giving us this day to learn more about praising you. Thank you for your sacrifice on the cross and sending your Son to die for us. Amen.
Okay, we'll sing just the first verse of 578, Trusting Jesus. If you'll stand. Simply trusting every day, trusting through a stormy way, even when my faith is small, trusting Jesus, that
Next week, church is in the park. It's at 10:30. Don't be late. Tomorrow, graduation's at 9 a.m. Then Cambria Adams is having breakfast here after the service. Everyone's welcome to come. The youth weekend, July 17th through 20th. Family camp, 24th through 26th. Anything else that I missed? Oh yeah, side or dessert, right? Okay. Yeah, so there's at the park in the shelter. Yep, after the service on Sunday is a potluck, so bring a side, and you don't need to bring meat. And let's eat together. If there's nothing else, I'll pray us out and we can go. Father, I thank you so much that we can be in this church today. I thank you for your people. Thank you for your love towards us so that we can give it to others. Father, I pray that we worship you every day in some way, shape, or form because you deserve to be worshiped. Thank you so much for this day. Amen.
Let's just praise the Lord. Number 18.